carried no rifle, no grenades. Just a Bible tucked against his chest and faith that burned brighter than the artillery fire around him. On April 12, 1945, atop a jagged escarpment on Okinawa, Army medic Desmond Doss did something that defied every law of war and survival. He stayed. While his unit retreated under devastating Japanese fire, while machine gun bullets carved deadly arcs through the air, while mortar shells turned the ridge into a vision of hell itself, Desmond Doss remained on that cliff, not because he was ordered to, not because he was trapped, but because 75 wounded men lay scattered across that killing field, and he refused to let them die alone. "Lord, help me get one more." That's what he whispered, over and over, as his hands, slick with blood, tied makeshift rope harnesses around broken bodies. As enemy soldiers hunted him through the smoke and chaos, as he lowered man after man down the cliff face to safety below. One more, just one more. The other soldiers called him crazy. A conscientious objector who refused to carry a weapon into combat. A Seventh-day Adventist who wouldn't even train on Saturdays. They tried to get him discharged. They mocked him. Some tried to break him. But on that ridge, as Japanese soldiers closed in and death seemed certain, Desmond Doss became something else entirely. He became proof that courage isn't measured by the weapons you carry. It's measured by the lives you save when everyone else has given up. 12 hours. That's how long he stayed up there. Exposed, vulnerable. A single man against an army. 75 lives. That's how many he pulled from death's embrace that day. The boy from Lynchburg, Virginia never wanted to be a soldier. Growing up during the Depression, Desmond Doss watched his father struggle with the demons of World War I. He saw what violence did to men's souls. At 12 years old, he stared at a framed poster of the 10 Commandments in his home. His eyes fixed on the 6th, "Thou shalt not kill." That moment changed everything. When Pearl Harbor pulled America into war, Desmond felt the same patriotic duty as millions of other young men, but his conviction created an impossible dilemma. How could he serve his country without betraying his faith? How could he face the enemy without becoming what he despised? The answer came in an unexpected form. He would serve as a combat medic. He would save lives, not take them. He would carry bandages instead of bullets, morphine instead of munitions. The Army didn't understand. When he reported for basic training at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, his refusal to carry a rifle marked him as a target. Soldiers who should have been his brothers became his tormentors. They threw shoes at him while he prayed. They threatened him. One soldier even held a knife to his throat, promising to kill him when they reached combat. His commanding officers tried everything to get rid of him. They attempted to discharge him as mentally unfit. They tried to court-martial him for refusing a direct order to carry a weapon. They assigned him the worst duties, hoping he would break. But Desmond Doss had faced his Goliath long before he ever put on a uniform. His father, scarred by the trenches of World War I, had once threatened his mother with a gun during one of his drunken rages. Young Desmond had stepped between them, wrestled the weapon away, and watched as the police took his father away. If he could stand up to his own father to protect his mother, he could stand up to an entire army to protect his faith. The harassment continued through training. But slowly, grudgingly, something began to change. His fellow soldiers watched him take their abuse without fighting back. They saw him share his pay with those who had gambled theirs away. They witnessed him treating their blisters and injuries with the same care he would later show on the battlefield. The first test came at Guam. As his unit hit the beaches, Japanese machine guns opened up from hidden positions. Men fell like wheat before a scythe. The cry went up that would echo across every battlefield. "Medic!" Desmond Doss ran toward the gunfire. Without a weapon to return fire, without the ability to suppress enemy positions, he moved through the killing ground with only his faith as armor. He pulled wounded men from the open, dragged them to cover, stanched their bleeding with trembling hands that had never seen such carnage. A grenade exploded near him, shrapnel tearing into his legs. He kept working. Bullets snapped past his head like angry hornets. He kept working. The tropical heat threatened to drop him where he stood. He kept working. That night, in a foxhole barely deep enough to cover his body, Desmond Doss proved something to his unit. The man they had mocked as a coward possessed a different kind of courage. The soldier without a gun had become their guardian angel in hell. But Guam was just the prelude. The real test waited in the volcanic ash and limestone cliffs of Okinawa. The Japanese had spent months turning the island into a fortress. Every cave held death. Every ridge bristled with artillery. They called it the last battle, and they meant to make it cost the Americans everything. The Maida escarpment rose 400 feet above the valley floor. Sheer cliffs on one side, fortified Japanese positions on the other. The Americans nicknamed it Hacksaw Ridge, and the name fit. It would cut units to pieces, saw through battalions like a blade through bone. On April 29, 1945, Doss's unit received orders to take the ridge. As they climbed the cargo nets thrown against the cliff face, Japanese defenders waited in silence. They let the Americans reach the top. They let them spread out across the plateau. Then they opened fire with everything they had. The first assault on Hacksaw Ridge turned into a massacre. Japanese soldiers emerged from hidden caves and tunnels like ghosts. Machine guns created interlocking fields of fire. Mortars dropped from the sky with deadly precision. Within hours, Doss's battalion was combat ineffective. As the survivors fell back to the cliff edge, Desmond Doss made a decision that would echo through history. He would not retreat. Not while wounded men lay helpless in the kill zone. "Lord, give me strength." He crawled back into hell. The Japanese could see him moving among the wounded. They fired at him. They threw grenades. But something extraordinary happened on that ridge. Call it divine intervention. Call it impossible luck. Call it what you will. But Desmond Doss moved through that deadly ground as if protected by an invisible shield. He found a wounded soldier, both legs shattered by machine gun fire. The man begged Doss to leave him to save himself. Instead, Doss fashioned a rope sling from a cargo net, secured it around the soldier's chest, and began lowering him down the cliff face. Hand over hand, his palms raw and bleeding, muscles screaming in protest. When he reached the bottom, Doss didn't rest. He climbed back up. One more. The prayer had become a mantra, a promise, a covenant written in blood and determination. He found a soldier with his abdomen torn open, intestines spilling onto the volcanic rock. Medical training said the man was beyond help, but Desmond Doss didn't abandon the dying. He packed the wound, tied the man into his makeshift harness, and lowered him down. Later, he would learn that soldiers survived. The Japanese hunters became the hunted. They couldn't understand this American who carried no weapon, who kept returning for the wounded even as darkness fell. Some thought he was a ghost. Others wondered if he was protected by spirits. In their confusion, their fire became less accurate, their pursuit less coordinated. Hour after hour, the ritual continued. Find a wounded man, drag him to the cliff edge, tie the rope, lower him down. Return for one more. His uniform, once olive drab, had turned dark with blood. Not his blood, though he bled from a dozen small wounds, but the blood of those he carried. Some men were conscious, whispering prayers or messages for loved ones as Doss worked. Others were mercifully unconscious, dead weight that threatened to pull him over the edge. He treated them all the same. Enemy snipers had figured out his pattern, waiting for him to appear at the cliff edge. Each trip to lower a man down meant exposing himself to their fire. He developed a system. Drag the wounded man to a spot just back from the edge, prepare the rope harness while staying low. Then, in one fluid motion, pull the man to the cliff and begin lowering immediately, before the snipers could react. His hands told the story of the night. Rope burns cut deep grooves into his palms. Blood made the rope slippery, harder to grip. Blisters formed, burst, and formed again. But still he worked, still he climbed, still he whispered his prayer, "Lord, help me get one more." A Japanese soldier emerged from the darkness, rifle raised. Doss was kneeling beside a wounded American, hands busy with bandages. No weapon to defend himself. No time to run. The enemy soldier had him dead to rights. The rifle didn't fire. The Japanese soldier stood frozen for a moment that stretched into eternity. Then he lowered his weapon and melted back into the night. Later, Doss would wonder what stayed the man's hand. Respect for a medic? Divine intervention? Simple human recognition of an act of courage that transcended nationality? He would never know. There was no time to wonder. Another voice cried out in the darkness. Another wounded soldier needed salvation. Dawn approached like a reluctant witness to the night's work. Desmond Doss had been on the ridge for 12 hours. His body operated on pure will now. muscles pushed beyond exhaustion into a realm where only faith could move them. The wounded kept appearing. Some crawled to him, drawn by word passed in whispers. The medic was still up there. The medic who wouldn't leave. The medic who carried no gun but fought death itself with his bare hands. He found an officer with both eyes destroyed by shrapnel, crying out in panic and pain. Doss spoke to him in a calm voice, describing each action as he performed it. "I'm tying a bandage around your head now, sir. I'm going to lift you up. We're moving to the cliff. You're going home." The officer would later credit Doss's voice with keeping him sane in those moments of absolute darkness and terror. As the eastern sky began to lighten, Japanese activity increased. They were preparing for a dawn assault, moving troops into position. Doss knew his time was running out, but wounded men still lay scattered across the ridge. He could hear them, moaning, calling for their mothers, calling for God. One more. Always one more. He found a soldier with a sucking chest wound, each breath a desperate struggle. No time for careful treatment. Doss sealed the wound with the cellophane from a ration package, tied the man into his rope harness with hands that shook from exhaustion and lowered him down. The man would live to see his children again. The Japanese assault began with the sunrise. Mortars crashed across the ridge, machine guns swept the ground where Doss had spent the night, but he was already sliding down the cargo net, the last wounded man in his arms. When he reached the bottom, when his feet finally touched safe ground, Desmond Doss collapsed. His fellow soldiers rushed to him, certain he was wounded. They found him conscious but spent, his uniform torn and blood-stained, his hands raw meat from the rope work. Someone began counting the men he had saved. The number seemed impossible. 75 soldiers owed their lives to one unarmed medic who refused to leave them behind. The story should have ended there. Any other man would have been evacuated, sent home a hero. But Desmond Doss wasn't any other man. When his unit prepared to assault Hacksaw Ridge again, he stood with them. His hands were still bandaged from the rope burns. His body still bore the exhaustion of his 12-hour ordeal. But his duty wasn't finished. On May 5th, as American forces finally secured the ridge, a Japanese grenade exploded near Doss. Shrapnel tore into his legs, 17 pieces of metal embedded in his flesh. As medics rushed to evacuate him, he spotted another wounded soldier nearby. He insisted they take the other man first. While waiting for the stretcher bearers to return, a Japanese sniper's bullet found him. It shattered his left arm, splintering the bone. Doss fashioned a splint from a rifle stock, the only time he would ever touch a weapon during the war, and began crawling the 300 yards to the aid station. He didn't make it. Exhaustion and blood loss finally claimed their due. When stretcher bearers found him, he was unconscious but still clutching his Bible. The same Bible that had taken a bullet meant for his heart weeks earlier. The same Bible he had carried through every battle, every rescue, every impossible moment. But even then, even wounded and broken, Desmond Doss's war wasn't over. On the hospital ship, he realized something was missing. His Bible. The Bible his wife Dorothy had given him, the Bible that had sustained him through the valley of death. He convinced a sergeant to return to the battlefield to search for it. Against all odds, they found it among the rocks and debris of Hacksaw Ridge. When they returned it to him, Doss wept for the first time since joining the army. The war ended while he recovered in the hospital. He would spend 5 years undergoing operations, eventually losing a lung to tuberculosis contracted during his service. The shrapnel in his body would remain, setting off metal detectors for the rest of his life. Each piece a reminder of the price of salvation. President Harry Truman stood on the White House lawn on October 12, 1945. Before him stood 3 men who had earned the Medal of Honor, America's highest military decoration. 2 were traditional war heroes who had killed many enemies in defense of their country. The third was Desmond Doss. As Truman placed the medal around his neck, he said something that would stay with Doss forever. "I'm proud of you. You really deserve this. I consider this a greater honor than being president." The citation read like something from mythology. Single-handedly evacuated 75 casualties from a 400-foot cliff while under constant enemy fire. Refused evacuation when wounded, saving more lives. Demonstrated magnificent devotion to duty and personal bravery of the highest order, but the numbers only told part of the story. They couldn't capture the weight of each body dragged across volcanic rock. They couldn't convey the burning in muscles pushed beyond human limits. They couldn't express the faith required to return again and again to almost certain death. The men he saved knew the real story. They formed a brotherhood bound by the most profound debt, life itself. Many named their children after him. They gathered for reunions where grown men wept openly, remembering the night on the ridge when one man's faith proved stronger than an army's fury. One soldier, Ralph Baker, had lost both eyes to a grenade on Hacksaw Ridge. Doss had found him in the darkness, voice calm and reassuring as he worked. Decades later, Baker would say, "I may have lost my sight, but Doss helped me see what real courage looks like. It doesn't carry a gun. It carries others." The fame that followed felt like another burden to bear. Doss had never sought glory. He appeared at war bond drives, visited hospitals, spoke at churches, always uncomfortable with the attention, always redirecting praise upward. "I was just an instrument in God's hands," he would say. "The real hero was the one giving me strength." The boy who had refused to touch a gun became one of the most decorated soldiers in American history. But the medals couldn't heal all wounds. The nightmares came in waves. Faces of men he couldn't save, the sound of mortars falling like thunder, the weight of bodies in his arms. Post-traumatic stress had no name then. Men were expected to come home and forget, but how do you forget carrying pieces of other men's souls down a cliff? How do you forget the prayers whispered in darkness, the promises made to dying boys to tell their mothers they were brave? Desmond found his answer in service. He worked with troubled youth, sharing his story not as a tale of glory but as testimony to faith's power. He tended gardens, finding peace in nurturing life after witnessing so much death. He remained married to Dorothy until her death in 1991, their love a quiet anchor in a world that often felt unmoored. When Mel Gibson approached him about making a film about Hacksaw Ridge, Doss was reluctant. He had turned down previous offers, fearing Hollywood would sensationalize or change his story, but Gibson promised to tell the truth, that a man could serve his country without compromising his convictions, that faith and patriotism could walk hand in hand, that sometimes the greatest courage is found in those who refuse to kill. Desmond Doss died on March 23, 2006, at the age of 87. He was buried with full military honors, the flag that covered his casket, presented to his family with the thanks of a grateful nation. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from the men who gathered at his funeral. Soldiers whose children and grandchildren existed because one man refused to leave them behind. They didn't speak of tactics or strategy. They didn't debate the weapons of war. They spoke of a skinny medic from Virginia, who proved that moral courage could triumph over physical force, who demonstrated that faith wasn't weakness but the ultimate strength, who showed that you could hate war but love the warrior enough to die for him. What makes a hero? Is it the number of enemies defeated, the ground captured, the medals earned, or is it something deeper, something that transcends the brutal arithmetic of war? Desmond Doss never killed a single enemy soldier. He never fired a shot in anger. By traditional military metrics, he contributed nothing to victory. Yet his story resonates across generations because it speaks to a truth we all recognize. The greatest courage is found not in taking life but in preserving it. In an age where strength is measured in firepower and success in body counts, Doss stands as a reminder that there's another way. That conviction doesn't require violence. That you can serve without surrendering your soul. That one person, armed only with faith and determination, can stand against the machinery of death and prevail. 75 men lived because Desmond Doss refused to accept the logic of war. 75 families remained whole. Hundreds of children were born. Thousands of lives were touched. The ripples of one man's courage spread across generations like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Today, at the National Museum of the Marine Corps, at the Army Medical Department Museum, at memorials across the country, people pause before displays honoring Desmond Doss. They see the slight figure in medic's gear. They read about the night on Hacksaw Ridge, and something stirs in them, a recognition that heroism takes many forms. In a world that often feels divided beyond repair, where differences seem insurmountable, where violence appears to be the only answer, Desmond Doss whispers across the decades, "There is another way. Stand for what you believe, serve with compassion, choose life over death. Let faith be your weapon and love your ammunition." His story isn't just about one night on a ridge in Okinawa. It's about every moment we choose compassion over conflict, every time we reach out to help instead of harm, Every instance where we say, Lord, help me get one more. One more act of kindness, one more life saved, one more proof that the human spirit, when anchored in unshakable faith, can overcome any darkness. The ridge is still there, a tourist destination now where people come to understand. They stand at the cliff edge and try to imagine the weight of a wounded soldier, the burn of rope on flesh, the courage required to go back into hell voluntarily. Most leave changed, carrying something of Doss's spirit with them. Because in the end, we all face our own ridges. Moments where retreat seems logical and advance appears impossible. Times when our convictions clash with expectations. Instances where we must choose between what's easy and what's right. And in those moments, perhaps we can hear an echo from 1945, a voice made strong by faith, made brave by purpose, made legendary by action. Lord, help me get one more, just one more. Like this video if Desmond's story moved you. Subscribe to hear more about the forgotten heroes who proved that courage comes in many forms. Share your thoughts below. Has anyone in your family served as a medic? Do you know someone who stood by their convictions against all odds? This channel exists for those who believe that history's greatest lessons come not from the generals who commanded armies, but from the individuals who commanded their souls. The medic who saved 75 men while carrying no weapon reminds us that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to fight and choose to heal instead.